And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rich Savage. I'm the sales director on our open source practice here at Carosoft, and I'd like to personally welcome you today to our webinar with our great partners, ForgeRock and UberEther. If you have any questions after the event, please do not hesitate to reach out to me directly. My contact info is on the screen there. My colleague, Blake Maurice, also a great resource for you. At the end of the presentation, his contact information will be up, so you can reach him or myself if you need to after the event to follow up with additional questions or if you'd like additional information. And for the real reason we're all here today, to talk a little bit about ForgeRock and Intelligent Access. ForgeRock is a industry-leading cybersecurity identity management company. They are very widely used across public sector, commercial sector in the US here and globally as well. And we brought a couple speakers from both ForgeRock and one of their great partners, UberEther, to talk a little bit more in depth about their identity platform and how it's helping organizations improve and scale all things identity governance and access management. So with that, I'd like to do a quick introduction to our speakers today. First, we have Chris Hunt, who's an identity architect with UberEther. Chris has spent over 28 years in the IT security space, servicing large multinational organizations and the US federal government, including both DoD and civilian. In the last 7 years, he served on 2 federal government projects as both an Oracle and a ForgeRock accredited identity architect, developing and configuring identity management in AWS, supporting both commercial and GovCloud environments. And this has included a recent implementation and support of ForgeRock in a production environment. So Chris, glad to have you and looking forward to hearing from you in a second here. And then secondly, we have Spiros Angelopoulos from ForgeRock, and Spiros leads a team of identity architects and engineers focused on all technical matters related to the ForgeRock identity platform for US and Canada public sector markets. He has extensive experience consulting on digital identity projects at all levels of government, from state and local, higher ed, provincial, federal, both defense and civilian. So tons of experience, tons of public sector experience on this call. Chris and Spiros, welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us today. And I'll turn it over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Rich. And this is Spiros, and I'd like to start with a brief introduction to ForgeRock for those that are not as deeply knowledgeable about our platform. ForgeRock has built over a little more than a decade now a very powerful, comprehensive, full-featured platform. And I know I'm using a lot of colorful words here, but it's the best way I can possibly describe the functionality set we bring to our customers. Our platform has evolved over this period of time to include very important functions that we see our customers needing, such as identity and access management, meaning knowing who is doing business with a particular organization, under what condition they're trying to access resources that are protected. Making sure we always know that the context of an operation is properly vetted and properly allowed based on the conditions that are present. Our platform has evolved, as I said, to include several very important elements, including things that support governance, artificial intelligence, so we have a comprehensive view of a person's activities. And we're able to do that not only using traditional means, such as things that you may have heard of in the past, like single sign-on, role-based access control, and so on, but we're also able to leverage modern and legacy technologies so that we can apply all the functions we support as easily as possible and allow our customers to leverage them for their individual business. Our company has been a contributor to standards for its duration, so we are members of the groups that define things like federation, access controls in general, standards for enabling users to enter the organization, standards for reporting, and so on. And a word that you may hear very often during our session here is the word flexibility. And the reason I'm saying flexibility is standards permit for us to have the flexibility to achieve the goals we're trying to achieve. This flexibility includes deployment models. We can deploy on-prem, in the cloud. We can deploy as traditional VMs. We can deploy with Kubernetes and Dockers and all modern types of environments somebody may need to leverage for their particular needs. But we can also integrate with just about everything that a customer base might have. And the reason we're able to do that is because our APIs are widely open and available to not only our customers, but also our partners. Our partners are usually described in our trust network to help us achieve the flexibility I'm mentioning. We have a very significant out-of-the-box set of features, of course, but we are also fully aware of the fact we cannot possibly provide everything that a customer might need in terms of that flexibility. So our platform has a very rich set of APIs that our partners leverage to create additional functionality that we may not offer directly out of the box. So things like identity vetting, identity proofing, access controls that may require external validations when somebody is trying to perhaps try to reach a protected resource. All these things are provided to us via either the platform itself or our external partners. Our partners, by the way, they're all certified. There is a certification process that they have to go through, which means that the elements that they provide to us are compatible, obviously, with our platform, but they also evolve with the platform's evolution itself. So an investment you may make in our platform today arguably would be there to provide similar, if not better, functionality through us and our partners in the future as well. Perhaps a great area where we can demonstrate the flexibility of the ForgeRock platform is if we focus a little bit on the access management side of things. We feel, and this has been the case from the get-go when the company started, that knowing who a person is, in other words, having the full knowledge of a person's identity, is vital in our being able to work with that person and provide services for a particular individual or a group of individuals. We feel that identity is essentially at the core of everything. So having the full knowledge of who we're interacting with allows us to offer personalized experiences that are, of course, secure as well. And they allow for those experiences to be applied to both modern SaaS and so on infrastructures, as well as perhaps legacy infrastructures or legacy applications that one might want to accommodate. Our portfolio is able to provide a consistent experience across the board for both new applications and legacy applications, even those that perhaps were never envisioned to have, the flexibility that we are providing as a whole. Again, things like single sign-on onto a mainframe-based application, very difficult thing to do. Outside the ForgeRock platform, we can do that very easily. Equally, if we want to provide protection to a SaaS application or a set of SaaS applications, easily achievable by ForgeRock as well. Now, when I'm talking about all this flexibility, I'm also talking about a rich set of functions that perhaps can become a little overwhelming to those that have never been exposed to the power of a platform such as ours. ForgeRock does a really good job at abstracting some of the more difficult tasks that one may encounter. And a perfect example of that is our intelligent access mechanism, and in particular, what we call intelligent authentication via trees. Trees is a mechanism that ForgeRock has implemented to provide a orchestration layer for authentication and authorization events, whether they come from within the organization or perhaps outside the organization through partners. Think of the trees as the example I always cite, a Visio diagram, where on the left-hand side of the screen you see right now, we have blocks of functions. These are functions we essentially drag to the right onto the canvas where we are creating the user experience. And from there, we can adjust according to the personalization options we want to offer or the requirements we need to satisfy for the organization. So things like biometrics, on-the-fly evaluations of activities by a user, geolocation, all the services one would want to have as part of a journey to authenticate and to be authorized are all available via this rich interface. However, a better example of how all this stuff can be used can be provided by our partners. And for that, I'll pass the mic to Chris so he can explain to us how the ForgeRock platform is able to enable functions that they support. Chris?
Thank you for that very good introduction. Chris Hunt, as you heard, I have a lot of years of experience in all the industries performing identity management. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about our ForgeRock journey here recently with our most recent customer, how our journey began. We were brought in to perform a migration from a SiteMinder custom implementation to ForgeRock. This implementation had been in place for almost 15 years, had various changes done to it over time. It was extremely complex in all the different features. You had applications written to it over a 15-year time period. It included Confluence, custom applications. It also required custom registration, as well as username and password, certificate-based authentication, dynamic role calculation, and we also had external service verifications that were involved. So the environment. The environment was actually a hybrid implementation between AWS, Azure, and on-premises. The unique challenge of this particular environment is that we had 18 different unique URLs in production alone, including 3 different root domains. Root domain as in google.com or yahoo.com would be a typical root domain. The applications, many of the applications had their own unique login pages. All of this configuration also had to be compliant with NIST 800-53, specifically in the areas of access control, identity and authentication, auditing, and risk assessment. And including, we also had to have these environments. 3 of these environments were considered what's known as DoD IL2. 2 of the environments were DoD IL4. And 2 of the environments were DoD IL6 in the FedRAMP arena. So we had different levels of controls and security things that we had to implement to cover all this. Include that with unique registrations. We had separated user application data stores, delegated administration, and unique authorization policies. So, and while all this was going on, as we were coming in to migrate off of CA SiteMinder, they had an active cloud migration going on while we were doing this to add to our unique journey. So as we go through and evaluate the environment, we then identify the identity components. And create a roadmap of how we get those identity components over to the new solution. So in doing that, we first had to look at the CA SiteMinder configuration and its unique customized login system. So to go through that, we took a look at how they were protecting their applications, how each application received its credentials, the authorization policies around those, and what applications required certificate-based authentication, and what applications and what environments allowed username and password or with an additional token-based authentication. So to replace that, we took a look at, we went ahead and implemented ForgeRock Access Management, and we implemented our fast track UberEther login framework, which leverages the unique power of ForgeRock of all of its REST APIs to be able to provide a customizable front end for the customer, yet still stay within the standards of the tree-based intelligent access that ForgeRock can provide. So we can leverage all of the things of the GUI aspects of real easy changing of the authentication structure, yet still have the customizable framework of a login page customized to your organization's unique look and feel. From there, we moved on to looking at their registration system. Now, they didn't have a standardized IDM or identity management type product. Many organizations don't that you come into. They don't have a standardized place where all access is made, or they have built their own custom system to deal with that. So what we found is application-specific registrations. We had distributed administration, which is common in many large organizations. Each application had unique requirements around what profile data they needed to actually grant access to that application. Along with, we had two external services that we actually had to authenticate users against, or not authenticate, but verify the user's information to ensure that that information was correct in the system and ensure that that user was valid. And then take that a step further, we had extended attributes. We had multiple data stores of user information. They have extensive, this organization is very into metrics, and they're very interested in metrics, so we had to build a very robust metric system to replace that. And a lot of that was leveraged with out-of-the-box ForgeRock IDM reporting. And then we had group virtualization. They had Open LDAP, which we, of course, replaced with ForgeRock Directory Services. So many of the custom things became out-of-the-box things, which saves the organization a lot of time, a lot of money, and a lot of development resources. And that also goes especially to their distributed administration system. We had many applications that were actually running their own versions of administration per app, which we were able to take into the ForgeRock IDM system and get them a centralized way of doing business, which greatly reduced cost from a manpower perspective across the organization, and their developers were no longer having to maintain those development portals for delegated administration. So as a part of, if I came into your organization today and says, I'm going to delete your identity directory, your whole LDAP, I'm just going to delete it right now. You would go, oh my gosh, what? You're going to do what to me? In our organization, because of our fast track CloudFormation templates that we can do with ForgeRock, I can now build an entire identity directory in 5 minutes. I can deploy it, I can auto-scale it, and I can replicate it across the board. And that's the power of the ForgeRock system, the ForgeRock identity products, is the fact that I'm able to put that into an AWS CloudFormation template or into a Docker template to be deployed on any system, actually customize it to the customer requirements, and then I'm able to deploy directory servers to in an auto-scaling method and set up replication between them, which allows us to auto-scale our identity structure based on need and scale it back when it's not needed, which is a significant cost savings for our customer, as that's what they were really looking for when they went to cloud as a part of standardization. And also, if a machine needs a new upgrade on a new OS, new patches, or anything like that, we simply deploy a new machine with all the customizations, automatically links up to all the other identity components, all a part of the auto-scaling solution. So, and this path is customer dependent. We can customize for additional attributes, all built into the actual formation template. So if you have 15 additional attributes you needed to your identity repository, it's all part of that CloudFormation template that we can do, or the customized Docker template that we can do, built into the system, still giving you that, what I call the 5-minute directory. Now, once we got into getting rapid deployment in place and getting these system structures in place, then we really started to look at the application migration itself. Moving from SiteMinder to ForgeRock was no easy task. Many of these applications had been specifically coded to talk to SiteMinder and SiteMinder variables. You'll notice an SM_user, which stands for SiteMinder user, on the slide. That was one of the many difficulties that we ran into. But with the power of ForgeRock, we were able to set up specific configurations for each application so that those applications could migrate without having to recode their interfaces immediately. And going back, this is a 15-year history of these applications being developed, and many of these application teams were simply no longer there. So we had to find a way to be able to migrate those applications when we didn't have any development resources to actually recode them, to change them to any kind of standardized way that they pulled in the user information. But the flexibility of the ForgeRock agent configuration allowed us to actually set up specific profiles for each one of these applications to bring them in line, and at the same time giving the customer a centralized place where they could then see and manage every one of their application profiles and know exactly what was being passed down to those applications. Centralizing, standardizing, creating a easy to use interface that doesn't require high-level technicians to go in there and take care of stuff. You can assign this to your standardized admins. They don't have to have special training, and they're able to go in and take care of things that in the old world of identity management, oftentimes you needed an identity management professional to take care of. On top of that, many of these applications also had unique policies around going back to some parts of their applications were public accessible, some required restriction to certain groups. Because we were able to specifically set up agent profiles for each one of these applications, we were able to set either inclusive or exclusive policies based on the requirements of that particular application. Even if some of these applications were running on the same box, the same Apache server, if they were running on the same box, we could still set up the individualized application modules for each one of those. And that held across different technologies, and as well as different software that we had to deal with, such as Confluence. Additionally, we were able to do things such as capture certificates as a part of our login process to enable blockchain encryption of some of the documents, as well as do a persona process for some of these applications, where sometimes you would have a user who would come in. Typical example, a user would come in with they normally worked as a contractor, but on the weekends they were a reservist, and we were able to do a persona process for each one of these applications so that we could exclude or include dynamically based on who they were at that time, how they logged in. So this is what we call the flexible model. I can uniquely set up login pages because of the REST APIs that are available to us. I can uniquely set up login pages, uniquely set up session variables for each application, and choose if I want to do exclusion policy, which means I exclude these URLs from authentication, or an inclusive policy. I only want these URLs to be protected. So because we were able to do that for each of those individual applications, we were able to meet every application's requirements across the board without having these applications having to change their code. That was critically important. And the worst problem we had was simply decoding the APIs and finding all the APIs so that we could exclude or include them, because many of the developers didn't even know, because the developers weren't there originally anymore, and they didn't even know where their APIs were anymore. So, and this was all part of that leveraging the UberEther framework. And a part of our UberEther login framework, which depends on the ForgeRock APIs, we also built in a process to allow us to link new certificate cards such as CAC, ECA type cards directly into the process, so that when a user came in and they had a different card at that time, we could, on the fly, dynamically relink their card to their account if certain credentials on the card matched to an existing account, or pass them off to registration, which is all part of that intelligence access flexibility of the trees. And that was, we are still, even with the custom process in front of that, custom login pages, because we were using the REST APIs, we were still accessing the intelligent access trees on the back end, which means that if you needed to change any of those processes, you simply went into the console and changed how the user authenticated. So, intelligent access. So, a part of this process as we went further down the line is a lot of these users were having to constantly request roles for things that they should already have access to. So, as we went further down the process and learned more about these applications, we began to see trends of, well, if this user already belongs to this group, he should already have this role and be able to access this document. So a lot of that is things that we started to build into the intelligent access part of ForgeRock AM. And then part of that too is leveraging the ForgeRock IDM system for processes where we needed to request additional information. So that all goes into evaluating usage and risk, automating role request decisions, all a part of that. So it really was a true win for the organization, because they had all the visibility, we consolidated all the role request systems, and we automated some things that would cause a phone call. That alone was a great savings to the organization. So what this all comes down to is, can the real user stand up? And that is where we came in to bring that together. Many of these applications, and this is true in almost every industry I have ever seen, applications are in a stovepipe model with different views of the data. Permissions are decentralized all over the place. And you know, how do you figure out what a role is? How do you figure out who should have what? And this organization was a classic case of that. We had multiple databases with account information in it. We had permission models that weren't updated. We had multiple LDAP directories in cloud and on-premise. And we consolidated all of that into one centralized system, the IDM system. And that played into how we could then leverage information that was in the IDM system to go back to do intelligent access requesting through ForgeRock AM. And that allowed us to essentially now give a full view of what the user's data looks like to the actual customer. The customer can go in and say, I know this user has these things. I know this user has these permissions in this particular database. And that's how in depth that we are now able to give a picture of the true user, what they actually have, and if you need to deprovision that user, the identity lifecycle elements to actually deprovision them from everything that they need to be removed from, or if they need to migrate to a different job, to actually grant them the access that they do. These are things that the customer couldn't do without significant amount of tickets and phone calls. Even us getting on site to get all of our accesses that we needed took us a good month's worth of time to get all the access that we need to all the different systems to actually be able to provide the solution to them. So this was a great time savings for the customer. It's a great time savings because many of their contracts that they would bring in would be 2 to 3 months, and then you would have contractors that would be sitting there for a month just waiting for access. So it was a big win for them. So that gets us to true identity, who a user is, what they are, what they have. And getting that for our customer so that they could see how the application looks or how their applications are being used, which is vitally important to them. Centralizing all their auditing to identify that true identity and be able to remove or add people. It's that holistic lifestyle, identity lifecycle approach. I mean, the amount of time that they took to build all these applications and the constant changes that they were doing, and there were a lot of communication issues with this customer simply because of all the siloing and all the non-centralized identity that was across the board. Different contractor teams. There's at least 10 different contractor teams building different applications on any one day, and be able to holistically look at what everybody has, what access they need. It's a great time saver from just debugging applications, because many times we were pulled in, our team was pulled in simply to find out why a particular feature of an application was not working. And oftentimes it would be, well, you needed this permission to do that. Did you grant that here? And we could actually, because we had that holistic look at the data, we could say, well, he's actually missing data in this particular database. So so that gets us to automating, centralizing the request. Now all of the request for a customer, whereas it used to go through multiple registration systems, now they go through one place, the identity management system. And then in certain cases, it doesn't even need to touch the identity management system. It simply uses intelligent access in the trees to automate access to those particular applications, which is an enormous time saver. And in cases where we need to collect additional data, we do business-based workflow requests where the customer can go through and they can constantly check the access. They have access to that through their profile screen, and they can see where their stuff is, because that's another big thing that was a great thing for our customer. Now, when somebody requests access, they can actually go into the screen and see where their access is, see who has approved it. They can even do basically a phone call, or not a phone call, but basically a poke on that person to say, hey, why did you approve my access? And we've all got that built in and managed, and a lot of it is out of the box, which was just a wonderful thing for time saving and automating the solution for the customer. So, and with that, I will conclude.
Thank you, Chris and Spiros. We have a few minutes left and would like to take this time to answer any outstanding questions. If you would like to submit a question, please look to the question and answer pod on the left-hand side of your screen. We've received a few questions throughout the presentation. The first one is how, where, and where can ForgeRock be deployed?
I'll take that, Chris, if you don't mind. The platform or any of its elements, because I keep saying platform, but the tools that comprise the platform itself can be deployed on their own, are available to be deployed in a data center on-prem, on somebody's laptop for testing purposes, or of course, more traditionally, it would be in a shared location, and it could be AWS, GCP, Azure, both as a VM or as a Docker, part of a DevOps architecture. In DevOps in particular, we are, I believe, the only vendor that has the full complement of the mechanisms required to deploy the Docker containers. And we do so not only for the access and identity management components and governance, but also very importantly for LDAP as well. For those of you who may not be familiar, LDAP is a very difficult, architecturally speaking, tool to deploy as a Docker because of the elasticity. We have actually cracked the code for that, and we can deploy that as a Docker as well.
Thank you for your response, Spiros. The next question is, do I need to purchase the entire ForgeRock platform, or can I buy separate products?
Yeah, I'll take that as well. Thank you. Separate products is perfectly fine. When we talk about the platform, we usually like to highlight the efficiencies gained by the components contributing to a business or technical initiative. However, our tools themselves can live equally happy on their own. So access management, as the example that we were showcasing earlier with Chris, is sometimes deployed just by itself with options added as the requirements necessitate. So if we want to be adding federation capabilities that extend beyond the basics and so on, those would be options we can add on top. So in short, individually or as a platform.
Thank you, Spiros. The next question is, which product are these authentication trees or drag and drop journeys a part of?
I'll take that as well. That is part of the access management product lineup, and it's a core functionality within the access management tool. So back to the previous question, if we were talking about unique products, individual products, that would be part of access management tool only. And it's a core capability. It's not an option. It's built in.
Thank you. The next question is, how difficult is it to add integrations with other leading technologies for authentication via intelligent access?
Chris, you want to take a stab at that, or I can take it as well?
It's not difficult to integrate other technologies. ForgeRock has a lot of toolkit, what I want to call toolkit type abilities. So it's very easy to integrate most of your authentication type stuff because of the REST APIs and also federation. Many of these applications can leverage federation, and so integrating between two products is fairly straightforward. With the IDM side of the house, integrating products through using REST APIs, classic example, our customer, many of these applications actually have to update the identity repository when user make changes. What we did there is we leveraged, these are custom components, so we were able to provide them REST APIs to actually perform these updates, which allows them to access. Another classic example of an integration that we have recently done was with AWS Windows Workspace, where we actually configured one of our AM stack to actually act as a radius server to actually integrate Windows Workspace authentication with ForgeRock AM.
If I can add something, Chris, to your answer, thank you for that. Our partner network that I referenced earlier is actually one of the areas where we can reduce the complexity, as I said many times already, in terms of extending the platforms or the components' capabilities. APIs are, of course, a great way of doing so when we do not have the out-of-the-box functionality available. But our partners provide those individual modules that one of our customers may want to use for enhancing their capabilities. So, for example, if a biometric or some other function is required for authentication purposes on top of what is already established, that becomes just a drop-in module into the authentication journey with no programmatic requirements added. In other words, there's no development per se to be done, just a configuration for the service that is being utilized. If I can also rewind a little bit, I failed to mention earlier on the deployment question that when I was talking about deployments, I should have said we're not exclusive to a particular model either. In other words, hybrid is a very popular word nowadays in our industry, and we are most certainly able to operate in a hybrid mode as well, meaning that we can be supporting deployments both in the cloud and on-prem simultaneously without any loss of functionality whatsoever. So the idea here is that if there are some components that may be better served in the cloud versus on-prem, we can most definitely support it as well. We can also support the concept of migrations from a traditional infrastructure, legacy infrastructure, to a more modern one as well.
And I'd like to add on to that. So the ForgeRock implementation that we did with this customer is both an on-prem and cloud-based implementation. Now, the key was that we were actually able to implement all of the ForgeRock components in the cloud and actually have some of the on-prem systems actually talk to the cloud architecture. Now, we could have split between the two, but we actually weren't required because the only communication that actually needs to occur between the agents that were on-prem protecting the on-prem applications and the actual ForgeRock AM server is all done over standard SSL encrypted 443. So that allowed them to make access decisions and prompt the user for login without complicated port openings between the two systems, allowing us to maintain one centralized access management system without the necessary of deploying one on-premise. Now, that wasn't the case for some of our IL6 environments where we had to do a little bit more around some of the security, but for the IL4 environments, we were able to perform that. So,
thank you, Chris and Spiros, for your response. The next question we have is, what is the biggest challenge to migrate off of SiteMinder?
So I'll take that one. The biggest problem with SiteMinder is the what we call the policy store. Oftentimes, the policy store is quite complex, and SiteMinder has depending on the configuration, SiteMinder has I'm only going to block these sites, but I'm going to allow everything else. Kind of more of an inclusion technology, inclusion policy protection versus an exclusion policy protection. So there was a lot of issues with that around migrating that, and also came to the agents themselves. SiteMinder has its own form of an agent, rather a gatekeeper on Apache server. That agent is not, depending on how it's configured, is not necessarily compatible with the AM agent trying to run on the same server. So oftentimes we would have to take an entire application server if it was running multiple applications and convert it all at once. And that was our biggest heartache, along with the policy stuff.
Thank you, Chris. Our next question is, what are the biggest efficiency gains by using ForgeRock?
Chris, you want to start and then I can add?
Yeah, so our customer The biggest efficiency gains were the centralized access, centralized visibility of the overall process of provisioning. That was the biggest efficiency, not to mention the speed of the ForgeRock system versus SiteMinder at the time was significant. A significant increase in space. We were able to deploy rapidly. That was a great efficiency, whereas the current SiteMinder solution required a whole lot more boxes to maintain. And if it broke, that required 6 to 8 hours of downtime before they could restore it, whereas we could have the ForgeRock solution back up in a matter of minutes. So that was one of the greatest efficiencies that they gained at our customer, was just simply recoverability and reliability, as well as we deployed it in a high availability solution, which means if one of our systems broke because of our auto-scaling identity, the system would pick up the slack with a new system as needed, or it would just recover to the other node, and the other node would take the work until we got another node online. So,
thank you, Chris. If I can add a couple of items to this, you hit on the uptime and basic, redundancy of the system. That is definitely something that we see our bigger customers. We have customers in the 100 million identities in one system, and they find that the system's reliability is extraordinary because of the way we can architect the core components, LDAP, for example, to be resilient in several dimensions. But that aside, the fact is that, as I also demonstrated very briefly earlier with our authentication trees, and Chris did too, we are able to abstract things that are normally, I believe with other vendors anyway, a little more complex to realize, if at all possible. So the very fact that we can modify an authentication journey, in other words, from the moment a user hits a protected page until they're authenticated, the way we manage that process, and we can alter it depending on context, becomes very important, because we're able to adjust fast and to the business's requirements, as opposed to being hampered by perhaps technical deficiencies or restrictions, I should say. The other element to add very briefly is the breadth of the platform in those instances where the whole platform can be leveraged lends itself nicely in accommodating the vast majority of identity and access management needs our customers have. Sometimes we see that there is something very specific, perhaps an edge case, where our platform may need some assistance from what is available out of the box. But in general, the vast majority of business and technical challenges our customers present to us are accommodated via the platform itself very, very easily, and with some configurations mostly, as opposed to deep programmatic integrations.
Thank you for your response. The next question is the deployment you described in your slides an on-prem deployment or in an off-site data center?
The implementation I described is a cloud-based deployment in AWS with on-prem elements and on-prem deployments as well. So we have both.
Thank you. The next question is, does ForgeRock have any artificial intelligence capabilities? If so, how does this work?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yes, we certainly do, and we have it in several dimensions as well. So the basic one is having full awareness of not only a user, but a group of users or the whole population, and what aspects of the platform are being utilized and under what conditions. So we have the intelligence of not only understanding actively how the system is behaving from an access perspective, perhaps, but more importantly, making sure that any edge cases where perhaps somebody has too much power, too little power, administrative access, and so on, all these things are captured in a way that they can be easily identified and addressed either automatically or via the system's policies. One example that was very interesting to me when I came across it about a year ago was where we performed an analysis for a particular customer and realized that they had actually I shouldn't say over, it was about 100 AD admin accounts in existence, but only a couple of them were ever being used in practice, which exposed the other 98 as perhaps unnecessary threat vectors into the environment. In other words, if I have admin credentials and I'm never using them, do I really need them? That kind of analysis can only be done when we take into consideration both the access capabilities we have and the access that we actually use and how those map to the business and technical policies of the organization. Our AI is able to capture all of these dimensions and provide corresponding resolutions, either manually or with automated tools that we can extend to.
Thank you, Spiros. Our last question is, how does ForgeRock play into identity proofing?
I'll take a stab at that. Chris, you can help me at the end if you want. We keep using the word orchestration because our platform is the orchestration layer, not only for the access controls, but more importantly, perhaps for the identity validation at the beginning. In other words, how do we know who we register and under what conditions a person may be registered? It could be as easy as perhaps an HR event where we add a person into PeopleSoft or SAP or some other HR application, and then their role automatically gets mapped into what assets they should have access to based on their job function. Or it could be something where we're trying to leverage IAL2, where we're trying to validate a user more strongly at the beginning, and as such, we want to replicate what pre-COVID anyway would have been done with a physical interaction with another person. Our orchestration layer is there to support pretty much any entry mechanism into the identity management portion of our platform, meaning that if we want to extend the user validation, the user proofing to perhaps internal databases, say, for example, a person is trying to register and they provide some personal information that only the organization would have, we can do that. Or if we want to extend to services outside the organization, perhaps a credit bureau, or perhaps an FBI database, that has actually happened as well, or some tool where the person's identity needs to be proven in a manner that corresponds to the asset the person eventually will have access to. We can orchestrate those entry points, and frankly, they become simple elements of the process of user validation. So we have yet to find an area where that identity proofing capability has come short in addressing the requirements of a particular organization.
And I can add to that. So we have an actual part of our system that actually does that. We actually go against two sources, DMDC and OPM, where we actually we do additional validation of the user before they're actually allowed into the system. So it's a practical application of that. We are actually doing that identity proofing when the user registers to our system. So, and it's done through we built connectors actually to the DMDC and OPM systems, and which allows the identity management product using out of the box processes to actually perform that through workflow and actually do those validations.
Thank you both for your responses. I want to give a few minutes for everyone to access the additional resources we have provided below. Chris or Spiros, do you have any additional thoughts before we wrap up?
This is Spiros, yes, and I'd like to thank everybody for their attention. We feel very strongly that the ForgeRock platform is able to address the vast majority of our public sector customers' needs from the identity and access management perspective. And for those that perhaps are just trying technologies right now and trying to understand the efficiencies that can be gained by a platform like ours, we are able to facilitate the thought process and build a roadmap toward a successful implementation. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, for attending. Hopefully the I didn't stumble too much on my words, so I appreciate your attention.
Thank you both. Thank you again, ForgeRock and UberEther, for your presentation. I would also like to thank all of you for joining us today. We hope you found this webinar informative and helpful to you and your agency. We have included several helpful resources related to today's webinar, including a recently released white paper which explains how the ForgeRock platform can be configured to achieve compliance with NIST digital identity guidelines. You can find this white paper and other resources in the bottom left box of your screen in the Additional Resources section. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please contact us via the information displayed on your screen. Also, at the close of today's event, you will see a survey poll. We ask that you take a minute to answer a few brief questions to help us improve future presentations and events. Finally, we will be emailing you all a link to an archived version of this webinar so you can view it again or pass it along to a colleague. Thank you again for attending.